The streets of Greenfield were postcard perfect, a pristine suburb nestled just outside a bustling city, with rows of white picket fences, manicured lawns, and two-car garages lining every road. People moved here for its promise of safety, community, and a school district renowned for being one of the best in the state. Yet for 15-year-old Jamal Davis and his mother Donna, Greenfield had always been a careful dance of appearing just right, knowing that, to some, they were outsiders. On the surface, Jamal seemed like any other teenager, though he stood out as one of the few black students at Greenfield High. Jamal loved basketball, video games, and dreamed of becoming a software engineer. But living in Greenfield had made him acutely aware of his difference, and he knew that his actions were scrutinized in a way his classmates weren't. Donna reminded him constantly,
"Keep your head down, be respectful, and remember that people may judge you before they know you."
Donna worked 2 jobs to afford their modest house in Greenfield. It was important to her that Jamal had a shot at the best life could offer, even if it meant living in a place that didn't always feel welcoming. Her determination was fueled by a fierce love for her son and a hope that, in this community, he could rise above the struggles she had faced. One crisp autumn evening, Jamal was walking home from basketball practice, taking his usual shortcut through a quiet tree-lined path between neighborhoods. With headphones on, he was oblivious to the world around him, lost in the beats of his favorite playlist. But as he approached the intersection that would lead him home, he saw flashing red and blue lights reflected off the houses in front of him. Sheriff Paul Carter, a towering figure in the community, was standing next to his police cruiser. A few months ago, he'd been promoted to police chief after his predecessor retired. Known for his tough stance on crime, Carter took pride in keeping Greenfield safe. But it wasn't long before the cracks in his demeanor showed. Many residents of color had quietly shared stories of his demeaning stares, unwarranted stops, and harsh attitude. Sheriff Carter's presence had become a silent weight on Greenfield's residents of color, though few dared to confront him openly. Jamal continued to walk, but as he approached, he noticed Carter watching him with a hard, unreadable gaze. Ignoring the creeping unease, Jamal looked straight ahead, trying to act as though he hadn't noticed.
"Hey, you, stop right there!"
Sheriff Carter's voice cut through the silence. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He removed his headphones and turned slowly, trying to keep his face neutral.
"Yes, sir?"
"What are you doing out here?"
Carter demanded, his eyes narrowing as he walked closer.
"Just walking home from practice, sir."
"Really? Mind if I take a look inside that bag?"
Carter asked, already reaching for it without waiting for a response. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he handed over his bag. This wasn't the first time he'd been stopped, but it was the first time he was genuinely afraid. Carter rifled through the bag, his hands moving slowly, almost as if he was hoping to find something incriminating.
"What exactly are you looking for, sir?"
"Just making sure you're not carrying anything suspicious."
Carter replied, smirking as he zipped up the bag, disappointed by the lack of anything to accuse Jamal of.
"Looks like you're clean."
He muttered, reluctantly handing back the bag. But as Jamal turned to leave, Carter's voice stopped him once more.
"Where do you live, kid?"
2 blocks that way on Elm Street."
Jamal replied, trying to suppress his rising anger.
"Yeah, I know the area. Been seeing a lot of unusual activity around there. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?"
"No, sir. I've lived here for years. I just go to school and play basketball."
Carter's eyes lingered on him, as if trying to read deeper than Jamal's words. But before he could say anything else, a car pulled up, and a woman's voice called out.
"Jamal, is everything all right?"
It was Mrs. Evans, his English teacher, a kind woman who often looked out for her students. She eyed the scene suspiciously, her gaze shifting between Carter and Jamal.
"Yes, Mrs. Evans, just a misunderstanding."
Jamal replied, grateful for her presence. Carter stepped back, clearly irritated by the interruption, and Mrs. Evans didn't miss a beat.
"Sheriff Carter, Jamal is one of my best students. I'd hate to think he was in any trouble."
"No trouble, ma'am. Just a routine check. Greenfield isn't what it used to be, you know?"
Carter replied with a tight smile, but his eyes were cold as they shifted back to Jamal.
"Good night, Sheriff."
Mrs. Evans said, her tone polite but firm. She gave Jamal a comforting look as he walked away with her, feeling a mix of relief and resentment. That night, Jamal lay awake, replaying the incident in his mind. He knew he should have been used to these encounters, but this time felt different. The intensity in Carter's gaze, the way he spoke to him, it felt personal, as though Jamal had become a target. The next morning, as Jamal made his way to school, he felt eyes on him. Kids whispered as he passed, and a few even laughed openly. News of his run-in with Carter had spread fast, and rumors began to take on a life of their own. According to the gossip, Jamal had been caught stealing, or vandalizing, or worse. Greenfield was a small town, and stories tended to grow bigger with each retelling. By the time he got to homeroom, he was fuming. When Mrs. Evans pulled him aside to ask if he was okay, Jamal could barely hold back the tears.
I'm fine.
He muttered, his voice strained. Mrs. Evans sighed.
Listen, Jamal, if there's anything you need, if you feel you're being targeted, please know you can come to me. I'm here for you, all right?
Jamal nodded, grateful but too angry to respond. As he left her class that day, he knew one thing for sure. He was tired of being watched, tired of being judged, and tired of feeling powerless. But he wasn't about to let it slide. If Carter thought he could intimidate him, he was wrong. Jamal was done being silent. A few weeks passed with no incidents, but Carter's presence lingered in Jamal's life like a storm cloud. He would see the police cruiser parked near his school or watch Carter driving slowly down his street, his eyes tracking Jamal's every move. It was clear Carter was just waiting for a misstep, any excuse to swoop in and make his life miserable. Then, one rainy evening, as Jamal was returning from the store, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned, and there was Carter leaning against his car, arms crossed.
Hey, kid, still hanging around my town, huh?
His tone was mocking, and Jamal felt the frustration bubbling inside him.
Just getting groceries.
Jamal said evenly, trying to walk past him.
Groceries, huh? Mind if I check?
Carter's hand shot out, gripping Jamal's shoulder firmly. This time, Jamal had had enough.
Let go of me,
Jamal said, his voice shaking but defiant. Carter sneered, tightening his grip.
Or what? You think you can get tough with me, boy?
Just then, voices rose from nearby, drawing their attention. Neighbors had gathered, murmuring in shock at what they were witnessing. Carter's eyes flicked around, realizing he was no longer just dealing with Jamal in isolation. He released his grip, but his glare promised retribution.
Go on home, kid.
He spat. As Jamal walked away, his fists clenched, he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. But this time, he didn't feel alone. For the first time, he realized that the people in his neighborhood were beginning to see the truth of who Carter was. The power dynamics were shifting, and Jamal was determined to see it through. Jamal didn't talk to his mother about what had happened that night with Sheriff Carter, but the neighborhood certainly did. Within days, whispers about the incident circulated, becoming a spark of conversation that Donna eventually heard from a concerned neighbor. When Jamal came home from school one evening, he found her sitting on the couch, her face tense with worry.
Jamal, come here. We need to talk.
Her voice was steady but layered with anxiety. Jamal hesitated, knowing exactly what this was about. He sat beside her, avoiding her gaze.
I'm fine, Mom. I can handle it.
Donna reached over and took his hand, forcing him to look at her.
This isn't something you should have to handle alone. Carter's been harassing you, hasn't he? This isn't the first time he's stopped you, is it?
The question broke through the guard Jamal had built around himself. He sighed deeply, unable to hold back anymore.
It's not, Mom. He's everywhere. Every time I leave school, walk home, he's there watching. He treats me like I'm some criminal waiting to mess up.
Jamal's voice cracked, and Donna pulled him into a tight hug, her heart breaking as she realized how much her son had been dealing with. Donna held him close, stroking his hair.
You shouldn't have to be afraid in your own town, Jamal. This ends now.
The next day, Donna went straight to the Greenfield City Council with her complaint, filing a formal grievance against Sheriff Carter. She brought evidence. Photos of his patrol car stationed outside their house at odd hours, records of his stops, and even statements from neighbors who had seen him harass Jamal. The council members, mainly composed of people who'd known Carter for years, were skeptical. But Donna was relentless. her voice unwavering as she described the psychological impact his harassment had on her son. But Greenfield was a town that thrived on image, and some council members couldn't know. To ignore the implications, they agreed to a temporary investigation, but privately, Donna knew they were protecting their own. Nonetheless, she felt that the town was finally listening and watching. Meanwhile, Carter had heard about Donna's complaint, and it enraged him. He was used to running the town with little oversight, his decisions often backed by his colleagues and longtime supporters in Greenfield. But now, people were scrutinizing his actions, questioning his authority. He began to see Jamal and Donna as a threat to his position, his control. His annoyance turned to simmering anger, and he grew more determined to find a way to silence them both. The following Friday, Jamal was at the park hanging out with a couple of friends from school when he spotted Carter's cruiser rolling into the parking lot. His heart sank. His friends noticed too and shifted uncomfortably, whispering between themselves. Jamal didn't want to give Carter a reason to approach, so he started gathering his things, preparing to leave. But Carter had other plans. He stepped out of the cruiser and approached the group, his expression smug.
What are you kids up to?
He asked, eyeing Jamal. Jamal's friends mumbled something about heading home, sensing the tension and quickly making their way out of the park. Jamal stayed, refusing to give Carter the satisfaction of seeing him intimidated.
Just enjoying the park, Sheriff.
Jamal replied evenly, but he couldn't ignore the thud of his racing heart.
Sure you are. Funny, you always seem to be just enjoying something whenever I see you. Got a whole file of complaints here about kids causing trouble in the area lately. Recognize any of these names?
Carter held up a list of people and incidents that had nothing to do with Jamal, but the implication was clear. Jamal clenched his fists, his frustration building. He knew Carter was trying to provoke him, to get a reaction he could twist into an excuse for an arrest. But Jamal remembered his mother's words and took a deep breath, holding back his anger.
No, sir, I don't know anything about that.
Of course you don't. Well, I guess I'll just have to keep an eye out. Wouldn't want troublemakers disturbing the peace in my town.
Jamal watched as Carter walked away, feeling the heat of humiliation and anger course through him. But instead of backing down, he made a decision. He pulled out his phone and opened his camera, catching Carter in the frame just as he glanced back. The sheriff's face twisted in anger when he saw Jamal holding the phone up.
What are you doing, kid?
Jamal replied calmly.
Documenting this. If you're going to keep harassing me, I'm going to record every second of it.
For a moment, Carter's face darkened with fury, but then he laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that sent a shiver down Jamal's spine.
Do you really think anyone's going to believe you over me? Keep playing your little games, kid. But remember, I've been in this town a long time. People trust me.
Jamal lowered the phone, his resolve hardening.
Maybe, but not everyone will if they see what's really happening. You're not untouchable, Sheriff.
The following days were tense. Jamal's friends and neighbors began sharing what they'd seen and heard about Carter's harassment. Uploading videos and stories on social media, the local community started to notice the pattern of Carter's behavior, and soon enough, it reached local news outlets. The story spread quickly, gaining attention for its chilling insight into the harassment a young black boy was enduring at the hands of a supposed protector. This only fueled Carter's rage. He doubled down, making it a point to surveil Jamal's neighborhood, leaving his cruiser in plain sight to remind everyone that he was still watching. But Jamal wasn't the only one noticing now. Neighbors began recording Carter's car as it lingered for hours outside Jamal's house, documenting every interaction he had with Jamal and other residents. One evening, Jamal was at home with his mother when there was a loud knock on the door. Donna opened it, and there stood Sheriff Carter, his expression colder than ever. He held a piece of paper in his hand, waving it in front of her.
This is a formal warning,
he announced, his voice dripping with disdain.
You and your son have been disrupting the peace, spreading false accusations, and causing a stir in my town. If this behavior continues, there will be consequences.
Donna didn't flinch.
We're only protecting ourselves from your harassment, Sheriff. You're not above the law.
Carter's face twisted with anger.
We'll see about that.
He muttered before turning and walking away, but not before noticing several neighbors watching from their porches, recording his every move. That night, Jamal and Donna sat in their living room, scrolling through the online responses to their story. People from all over had begun sharing their support, expressing their outrage at Carter's behavior, and demanding accountability. Donna placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, smiling through her exhaustion.
You see, Jamal, you're not alone in this.
As the pressure mounted, Carter felt the walls closing in on him. Complaints poured into the police department, and his colleagues grew uncomfortable with the attention he was bringing to their precinct. The city council, initially hesitant to intervene, could no longer ignore the wave of criticism and public outcry. They decided to hold a formal hearing to investigate Carter's conduct, putting him on temporary suspension. The day of the hearing, Jamal and Donna entered the council room, joined by their neighbors, friends, and community members who had witnessed Carter's harassment. As testimony after testimony was presented, detailing the sheriff's pattern of intimidation and targeting, Carter sat stone-faced, his reputation unraveling before him. When it was Jamal's turn to speak, he took a deep breath, looking out over the room filled with people who had come to support him.
I've spent my whole life trying to fit in, to prove that I deserve to be here, but no matter what I did, Carter saw me as a threat, as less than him. All I want is to live without fear, to walk down the street without wondering if I'll be targeted just because of the color of my skin.
His words hung heavily in the room. By the end of the hearing, the council voted unanimously to remove Carter from his position. The crowd erupted in applause, relief, and vindication flooding over Jamal and his mother. Outside the council building, reporters swarmed around Jamal asking how he felt about the outcome. He looked to his mother, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at the cameras.
I'm glad that justice was served, but this isn't just about me. There are so many others who face this kind of discrimination every day. My hope is that this makes people think twice before judging someone based on how they look, and that it encourages those who feel powerless to stand up, because sometimes the only way to defeat hate is to make it impossible to ignore.
As the crowd dispersed, Jamal felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a newfound strength. He and Donna walked home together, surrounded by their supportive neighbors. For the first time since moving to Greenfield, Jamal felt like he belonged. And as for Carter, he left Greenfield in disgrace, his reputation tarnished and his authority dismantled. The town moved forward, a little more aware, a little more united, and with the hope that such hatred would never again be given a place to thrive.